O'Reilly and are probably surprised that I'm now running a hardware incubator. Highway 1 is its name. But actually, I've been doing hardware for a long time. I built a car back in 2004. It's kind of a round car with 3 wheels that would spin in place. And it didn't run for very long. It was mostly aimed at the desert. But we had a great lighting system. Unfortunately, it took us a lot of work to make that car for Burning Man. And the $15,000 that we spent on it, that it ran for 3 hours, didn't really pay off. It would have been a lot easier if we'd had a lot of the tools that we have today. Software like GitHub and Upverter to collaborate, Arduino. We wouldn't have had to make our own microcontroller, MakerBot for prototyping. We wouldn't have had to build out our own shop. We could have just gone to Tech Shop, what I consider the hardware aficionados' local IDE. So now, I'm not going to say that prototyping is solved, but prototyping is certainly attainable by anybody who would like to kind of delve into hardware. Now, the other thing we were missing was money. And there are a lot of avenues for folks to get money these days. And I think you've seen these crowdfunding sites where folks can put up their prototypes that they've done with Arduino and made on MakerBot, and then raise money to build thousands of them. However, that ends up with another problem for them. They now have to ship 10,000 of those things. And I'm glad that I didn't have to do that for my car. So that brings us to the second trend that's happening right now around hardware. Crowdfunding brings dollars, but it also brings a lot of pain. At Highway 1, we're trying to help companies deal with this pain. People who have ideas, who have prototypes, but don't know how to actually scale, come to us, and we teach them how to do that. Now, we're backed by PCH, which is a large supply chain manufacturing company in Shenzhen that handles tens of millions of SKUs a day, $10 billion worth of products a year. And so we take their expertise and share it with the companies. And we bring them to our space in the mission. And right now I'm running my first class, and I'm on week 5. And I've got 11 teams, comprising about 32 people from all over the world, all different types of backgrounds, and with a variety of different types of products, but all with one thing, which is they need to make a lot of them. So our medical device company will want to ship 10,000 next year and 30,000 the following year. But starting out as just prototypes, they don't know how to do that. It's kind of a dark art. And so what I'm going to share with you now is what I've learned from watching these startups just in the past 5 weeks. One is that prototyping is just the beginning. And that, I think, is the hardest lesson for these startups to take on, is that the prototype that they walked in the door with is not good enough for them to actually take to a plant and have made. There are many steps along the way to actually turn your prototype into a product. Now, we take companies at the very beginning of this step that have built their first 1 or 2 products, know how to make their more complicated sub-assemblies, but haven't fully integrated them together yet. But they don't understand how they're going to move their prototype into production by starting to replicate the manufacturing techniques that they'll use, by switching from using a 3D printer to actually using a CNC, so they see how the factories might mold the part with injection molding. And then finally, they haven't even begun to think about how they'll actually distribute these products. Because that type of scale requires rigor. And that's something that prototyping doesn't teach you. It's easy to make 1 of something, and it's possible to make 10. And with enough friends, pizza, and beer, you might even be able to make 200. But to make 10,000 and have them not shipped back to you takes a lot of skill and rigor and thought. And when we first started out, I thought that our teams would be simple. You'd need a hacker who knew how to develop for iOS and Android and build your web stack. You'd have a hustler who was out there making business deals. And you'd have a designer who figured out the user experience. And I had gotten these ideas from Dave McClure, except I added one more, the maker, the person who's adding hardware. And I think that team works. Those 4 people, or those 4 sets of skills work for prototyping. But when you come and you want to do your next 10,000, suddenly that maker blows out. And you actually need a mechanical engineer, you need a double E, and you need firmware. And these are skills that the typical prototyper doesn't have. And so suddenly they realize they need broader teams to come together, more diverse. Now software is very different from hardware. Hardware just takes a lot longer. With a piece of software, especially on the web, I can update my website in less than a day. With hardware, I have to get something fabbed, I have to send it out, it takes 2 weeks. To get it back, it takes another 2 weeks to build, another 2 weeks to test. So it's a 7-week turnaround time. And that's something that hardware will never escape. Now we're taking these companies to China, to Shenzhen specifically, so they can tour things like the electronics markets at Huashan Bay, where they can see how these folks have iterated quickly on different devices. You can get things like an Angry Bird phone, or a $12 phone that's glued together with simple buttons, but actually does work and has an MP3 player. Where you can get circuits embossed on flexible material that's tiny and small, and you can picture this on a jacket. And yes, where you can buy your Android and iPhone at the same store. And still get a latte. Because manufacturing informs design. And so as I mentioned before, if you're relying all the time for prototyping on your 3D printer, you're not really realizing how the product is going to be made in the factory. And so you need access to real tools. It takes skill to drive. And so we take them to China to teach them that. And then finally, it's important to realize that software still does really matter. Software often defines the user interface that these products will have. And the main way I interact with my Sonos is not with the box that sits on my stereo system, but instead through my iPhone. And it needs the hardware to drive the music and power my stereo. But the way I find my favorite Lady Gaga tune is through my iPhone. So these are the kind of tenets that we've been drilling into them and that I've been learning along the way as I began this journey. And today I'm pleased to announce that we're actually opening up our spring applications. And again, we'll be offering up a China-ready curriculum where we teach them how to go from just being prototypers to actually being hardware companies. It's a 4-month program. We take them to Shenzhen for 2 weeks. In fact, I leave on Friday for this class. And we have dedicated, experienced engineers who are there helping them. So if you want to build hardware, or if you know someone who does, please send them to AngelList later today and ask them to apply. The applications will be open until mid-January. Now, if you don't want to go into our program, this is a book that I highly recommend you check out, From Concept to Consumer by Phil Baker. Came out back in 2004 and talks about his work in Kodak and Palm and Apple. And for what could be potentially really dry material, it's a great book, so I recommend it if the hardware bug is itching you. I'm Brady Forrest. Thank you very much.